and opinions of the hosts and guests do not reflect those of the station.
Good morning. Welcome to Expat Insights. I'm your host Raju Mandhyan. Here at Expat Insights, we take external views of internal successes by foreigners, expats, and immigrants who have made Philippines their home and are doing good in the Philippines, either in business or society. This Friday morning on Expat Insights, we have two guests. One of them is a big Scottish person from Scotland, of course, and he has been in the Philippines for nearly 10 years. And he is now into the property business, which is rare for an expat to do so in the Philippines. But let's hear it from him, my guest, Jim Donald. I don't know what MACA means, but he'll explain. Welcome to Expat Insights, Jim.
Thank you, Raju. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Jim, start by telling us about your adventure into the Philippines, your advent into the Philippines.
I actually came here to retire at the tender age of 40.
That is nice.
And did a very bad job of it, actually. Realized that it was a little bit too early and really needed a reason to get up in the morning. Right. And so plunged myself into business 10 years ago. And have a variety of businesses here. I've found it very inspiring to be here and work with people and see them develop. And I enjoyed it a lot.
What were you doing that helped you or put you in a position to retire at 40? I'd like to know that.
I was working in Hong Kong, working in Japan, and I think those societies are very intense. You get rewarded, but you also have to give your pound of flesh. And so, you work at the equivalent of two jobs, even though it's only for one employer. And, I think people understand and see the effort that you put in, and they reward you as a result. And, to retire to a place like the Philippines at the time that I did, 10 years ago, where property was undervalued and the cost of living was fairly low, seemed like
10 years ago, 2003. That was
2003, 2004.
It's still a good time to come in here.
Very good. I think if you picked up a rock in the center of Makati and threw it at a building, you really should have bought it.
Really,
the property market was still very depressed after the
Asian crisis.
The Asian crisis, and the Philippines took a lot longer to get back on its feet. It was a slower upturn, and probably in retrospect a very much better planned one. We're now seeing a sustainable growth that has evolved as a result. So
you believe so?
It was a good time for me to arrive, to be honest.
Really,
I think there were a lot of people looking for challenges. I think the BPO industry was just starting to get a hold, and I think people were looking for opportunities.
I mean, compared to Hong Kong, Singapore, and so many other Asian nations, no, the Philippines property hasn't really grown in the last 3 decades. I mean, you buy a piece of property, it probably multiplies in value twice or thrice over the years. You go to Singapore, I mean, you buy a piece of property, and boy, it multiplies so many times. Is that true, or that's just my perception?
No, absolutely true. But then, Singapore and Hong Kong in particular are very unique markets. It's a little bit like downtown Manhattan. There's a defined amount of land. There are only so much land that is being allowed to be purchased and built on by the government in Hong Kong, and Singapore has even more acute problems with regard to just space to build.
Yeah.
We're seeing now a lot of infilling within the central parts of Manila, where land that hasn't been used for decades is now finding a productive use, and that was something that was very prevalent when I arrived in the Philippines.
Yeah.
The amount of unproductive assets. People had warehouses, they had condominium units, they have lots that were sitting vacant, doing absolutely nothing, not contributing to society. So what we're seeing now is a lot of very expensive pieces of real estate that are now coming into play. They're now being used as commercial buildings. They're now being built on as residential places. Farming land that is now being utilized. And these are all very strong things, and they're helping to grow the economy.
I do recognize and notice that Fort Bonifacio did not exist in 2003. It was almost a flat land, except for a couple of restaurants and stuff. No, how much has it grown? How many, in terms of percentage, in all aspects of property, whether they are commercial, residential, or other usages? You think it has doubled in the city, or?
I think absolutely. I mean, you just need to look at the number of units that are being built in the center of Makati. Obviously, up in the fort, it's all new in the last 8 years or so, 10 years. Even structures like Greenbelt didn't exist. And that, to me, is iconic. For me, Greenbelt was the stake in the ground. It showed that if you properly planned...
There was no Greenbelt. There was Greenbelt 1 when you came 10 years ago.
Right, and you look at... I mean, Greenbelt 1 has already been redeveloped. They're starting to try and improve the way that it looked. But just that whole concept of an urban living, you know, right in the middle with the sky rises all about you, but being, you know, in front of a waterfall and the greenery. Yeah. And just, it's a class act. And it was, for me, it raised the bar. I think people started looking very differently at the way they were building, at what they were building, at the quality of what they were building, because Greenbelt worked. And the thing that I find very interesting is that when you wander around Greenbelt now, 95% of the people that are using Greenbelt are Filipinos. This is not an expat haven. It's not a place where people with only, you know, serious sums of money go. It's really being used by the local community, and is now having a very significant spin-off with regard to the area around about it.
Yeah. So tell me now, where do the opportunities lie? I mean, it's growing, and where is the growth going, and where does a person invest in?
I think it's dependent on your own objectives. It's like any kind of investment. You've got to be smart about it. You've got to get people around you who understand the market better than you do and can provide advice. It's no different from going into the stock market. You know, if you get the right advice and you do it in the right way, then I think real estate investment works very, very well for you. You've just got to understand your own goals. And one of the issues we have when we're dealing with our clients is really trying to get them to understand what they want. We have people coming to us saying, I want a studio unit in the center of Makati, and they'll end up buying a 2-bedroom in Rockwell. A lot of time people need to you need to lift the stone a little bit, and you've got to get them to really understand what their objectives are and what's going to work for them.
So is that what you do, residential property, or you do
most of our business is residential property. We do commercial as well. We have a mix, but I would say 80% of our business is residential in the center of Manila, and a large proportion of our clients are expats. They, especially when they're buying property, they just feel more comfortable dealing with someone who understands where they're coming from and what their objectives are.
You see the big picture. You see the big. So, what is your business model, and what? How did you establish yourself? What was your starting?
When I first arrived here, I think it was very important for me to commit to the country. I'd been in rented accommodation. I'd owned property most of my life, but when I was living in Japan and Hong Kong and in the US, it was always rental accommodation. Yeah. And I got tired of living in places that weren't my home. Okay. So when I first arrived here, the first thing I did was buy property.
Which was where, in Makati?
In Makati, in Salcedo Village, in Legazpi Village. Yeah. You know, I like the feel. Contrary to the perception on the other news networks, the international news networks, it was a very safe place to live, and still is. Remarkably safe for inner cities. And people forget that about Manila. You know, there was a lot of bad press.
I'd like you to say that again, because, you know, there's so much bad news going around about living in the Philippines.
I don't think there is now. I think that internationally it's flipped. It's now a sexy country. The growth is here. The people have always been very warm and open. I think now we've got a real depth. We've got credibility. And you see that in the quality of the expats that are coming here.
Huh? Yeah.
It's very prevalent. You can really feel it. So when I arrived here, I honestly get tired of dealing with people who didn't really understand the market. they weren't giving me a level of service. They weren't advising me. They were introducing me to properties and to owners.
You're talking of agents or managers or
agents,
almost
brokers,
developers?
not so much on the development
Yeah.
side, just on the intermediaries.
Yeah.
Who were not properly coordinated and supervised at that time, before the resale law, before
No
the Real
kidding.
Estate
Really,
Act
there's
came
so
in.
many companies. There's thousands of them.
But everyone was a real estate agent. in
Yeah,
those
I
days.
know. That's why I did an event one time for this group of real estates, and I was thinking, man, everyone's left their home, their palanques, and they're here trying to sell property.
No, over the last 3 or 4 years, there's been a very significant change in the landscape. The new legislation that came in, and the PRC now overseeing more tightly the regulation of agents and brokers. Now, one broker can only supervise 20 agents, so you don't get 1,000 people that are going out trying to sell
really?
unsupervised. So
Yeah.
it's still early days, in any industry that is structuring and restructuring itself internally. It does take time to develop, but it's certainly moving in the right direction. And really getting back to your initial
To
point,
your business model, yeah.
that was my motivation, was really to try and get involved and understand the market better, because the market has moved significantly. Like I said, when I first got here,
Yeah.
you literally threw a rock and you would buy whatever it hit. Now you have this gap that is opening up between the pricing in the new developments, which
Yeah.
are running up at anything of 150 to 200,000 a square meter in the higher end
Right.
units,
Yeah.
with the resale market, where there's a lot of more substantial, slightly older buildings,
Yeah.
which are less than half of that. And that's
Really?
a big differential. Big differential.
Well, how about the quality and
Again, it really depends, and that's where people have to be very selective in what they're looking at.
is that such a huge difference between existing property and new ones?
And there's not really any massive correlation between price and quality.
Yeah, I
you
was
can still
thinking,
buy
yeah.
something that is high priced and still not good quality.
Right.
You can still, in the resale market, get slightly older properties that were built to last.
Mm-hmm.
And that's our challenge, is trying to identify where those real long-term investment opportunities are.
Yeah. So that's the kind of service you provide.
Absolutely.
And your clients are mostly expats?
Most of them. We're finding that a lot more Filipinos are now using us.
Yeah.
Because our reputation is there, and we're out in the marketplace as people that you can be that you can
And
trust.
do you have a team of agents or?
Yeah, we have a very good team. We've also got a very big back office team. Our commitment is really to try and build the biggest independent source of listings in the center of Makati, because it's important that we understand the market and that we give people the right product.
Tell me a bit about the safety, the legal work that is done behind buying property, and follow it through with the banking and finance. I mean, what is a good thing about what is going on today?
I think the good thing is that it's now more structured.
Compared to 10 years ago?
Yeah, very much so. There's very straightforward due diligence that we do when someone is looking to buy.
Yeah.
The problem is that it still has a long way to go. The
Yeah.
registration process is far too long in this
Yeah.
country. So when we're dealing with a client, we'll approach the BIR, we'll approach City Hall, and we'll make sure that we get their tax compliance, that we get their certificate of registration, the certificate of title. So there's a lot of work that we can do to make sure that the title is clean, that all the taxes have been paid.
Yeah.
And it's important that that is all dealt with before we enter the detailed discussions and negotiations in any kind of purchase
What
situation.
about what they call as pre-development sales? How about that? You can't do the paperwork, right? So you just live on a deed of sale?
The paperwork in those situations is largely done by the developer.
Yeah.
They have their own legal teams. The issues that we have is that the legal process there and the administration just takes far too long. We have clients that are waiting 3 years, 4 years to get
For their
a
formal
title.
titles, yeah?
And that's wrong. It's just wrong. In the resale market with clean title, we deal 99% of our properties have got clean title. 2 months to transfer the title is all that it takes. It's a very well-defined process, and for us now, a very much smoother process. the biggest problem that we have, and you alluded to it earlier, was on the banking side, on the finance. I think realistically, for the pricing differential between the resale market and the pre-selling to narrow, we have to have a much more liquid market. The secondary market is really not that liquid.
How do you mean that? I mean,
finance is much more readily available here now. The banks are much more easy to deal with. It's much easier to get loans. A lot of owners, a lot of people who are selling properties don't want to deal with people who have got bank finance because it complicates the sale transaction.
If it's not a fully paid property, you mean?
Right.
Okay.
You have to wait. And in the Philippines, and one thing that a lot of people don't understand is that you have to wait until the title transfers before the bank will make the payment. So they will guarantee a mortgage, but you actually have to wait.
Credit.
You have a letter of guarantee. But you have to, the owner has to wait until the transfer titles until he gets that cash, and that's something that's realistically out with that owner's hands. Now it should take 2 months, but it could take 6 months. And a lot of owners are not prepared to wait, especially overseas Filipinos, for example, who are very skeptical. You know, when they left the country, they knew how difficult the legal system was here and the title transfer. And while there have been improvements, they don't necessarily recognize that, and they're very suspicious of it. So
I think I would be too big, because I've lived in this country for 30 years, and I knew how the system was 20 years ago. I'd still be concerned if the transaction doesn't happen in a jiffy, so to say, no?
Yeah, especially with people who have, our clients, for example, coming from the UK and the US, where as soon as you buy something, the title transfers same day.
In countries of
yeah, absolutely. So you pay your money, your title is immediately registered in your name.
Right.
People here really get a little bit concerned when they find that they have to wait and there's a process they have to go through that they can't control.
And where are the interest rates going today? I mean, today I know it is cheap, and
it's cheap
compared to the rest of the world.
Yeah, well, the Philippines is cheap compared to historically in the Philippines. The Philippines is not cheap compared to the rest of the world.
Still,
you get a one-year mortgage here, one-year mortgage rate at about 5.75%.
Wow.
For 5-year or 10-year money, you'll probably pay 7.5%. You compare that.
That is not expensive. Yeah, you're right. Historically, it's not expensive.
Historically, it's not expensive for the Philippines, but it's expensive compared to international rates, where they're down at maybe 2 to 3%. So the cost of borrowing here is still higher than I think it really should be. But the outlook for interest rates is fairly flat at the moment, given that the economy is relatively strong and that we're in a fairly stable environment.
So for an investor, I mean, not somebody who wants to come and live and retire or do business in the Philippines or, you know, establish himself, but somebody who wants to just buy, sell the properties, it doesn't value much over time. So where is the gap there?
No, we're seeing very significant value added from the property sector in the last 3 or 4 years. I mean, the great thing about where valuations are now is that rental yields are quite high.
Yeah, that's where the income is.
Make about 8% on your rental yield gross, whether you're buying a resale property or you're buying top-end pre-selling.
Yeah.
And the annual growth has been about 10% for the last 3 to 4 years. So you're seeing quite a significant added value in these properties.
Right. Good. So it is a boom.
It's a well planned, well structured development within the industry. I mean, it's been a long time coming. You've got to remember that a lot of people waited a long time to see the real estate sector move back up. So when you say it's a boom, I would say that it's an industry that is now starting to develop a bit of strength. I think it's consistently growing. It's not. We haven't seen 20 or 30% hikes that we see in places like Hong Kong or London, it's a gradual momentum that has built. With yields still fairly high, you've got to say that prices must be deemed to be reasonable. And we're seeing an influx of people who are looking to rent in the city centre at those kind of rates. So we're actually, one of the challenges for us is finding enough quality properties to rent at the moment.
You probably have a listing. Hey, Jim, thank you very much for being on Expat Insights. Before we go, tell me, what does the future hold for you? How long are you going to be in town? Or is this where...
They'll be burying me in the Philippines. No worry. I hope not too soon.
Yeah, so would that be in Metro Manila or would be in another beautiful part of this country?
I think at the end of the day, I've always been living in big cities, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Washington, D.C. I like the cut and thrust of it. But I have a holiday home here down in Batangas, and I enjoy getting out of town regularly as well. So I think it's a case of getting the balance.
So thank you very much for being on Expat Insights. Thank you for your inputs, and may your business grow, Reality Homes.
Thank you. Yours too.
So ladies and gentlemen, that was Jim Donald from Reality Homes, and right after the break we'll come back and we'll talk to a lady from a very large group of investors in property, and we'll see you later. I'm your host Raju Mandhyan. This is Expat Insights. Stay watching.